Hello, my name is Eating the Dungeon, and welcome to my first lecture in a new video series, How to Integrate Culinary Culture into TTRPG Worlds. Many of my videos thus far have been about cooking specific monsters, or the culinary cultures of individual groups or regions. This will be different. This will be a focus on developing your toolkit as a writer or game master, and how you can fit food as an important vector in your world building and storytelling. But first, let's ask an important question. Why does food matter? To answer that, let me paint a scene for you. Your party is crowded around a small, rickety table in the first tavern they see upon entering a new town. You extensively describe the sight of the denizens of that new city, emphasizing just how new and interesting this location that you handcrafted is. The outfits of the citizens, the thugs lurking in the background, the workers grabbing a pint after a long day working at the docks, maybe even the armaments of a particularly interesting mercenary that they should pay attention to. Perhaps you even describe the smells that pervade this greasy establishment. But what are they eating? Gruel? Mutton and vegetables? A pint of ale? What food is here that they haven't eaten before at every other tavern they've experienced on their travels? Why does this coastal city have the same cuisine as the one that they visited in the desert mountains, or the Great Plains, or the frontier town near the haunted swamp? Food is such a large part of the human experience, and particularly the experience of exploring new and exotic places. That excited feeling that you get when you have a new dish in a new city, the first memory of a cuisine that you would fall in love with, the nostalgia of a dish that you haven't had in years that still tickles your taste buds. Even more than our own individual experience, though, food is the culmination of every person in a specific area's experience with it. It's a reflection of the culture of an area. How a group of people approaches the idea of food and eating can be just as important as what they're eating. And finally, it's a representation of the economic and geographic factors that define an area. What ingredients are native to the area? What crops or animals thrive in those conditions? And what other cultures is that area trading with to receive ingredients outside the boundaries of their own lands? A common spice in one nation could be a delicacy far away. Or maybe an ingredient isn't exported at all, whether by local importance and customs, or just by infeasibility of transport. With all of those questions in mind, food is a massively overlooked piece of the puzzle when it comes to discovering the worlds that we build for our players. As game masters of any TTRPG, whether it be Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Lancer, Cyberpunk, or any other system, the primary challenge is in giving our players vivid and believable answers to 3 specific questions about their own characters. What are those questions? First, who we are. Characters are a collection of details about who they are and how they act in different situations. Small details end up being the most memorable, though. We might not think about how a character wants to save the world as much as their soft spot for a tuna sandwich. And importantly, characterization can be much more impactful via subversion than by reinforcement, and food can do that too. A good example is in breaking expectations of what food or drinks a character likes. For example, let's imagine a hardened killer is brought into the scene. They're offered a strong drink by their employer after a hard job, and they turn it down and ask for an orange juice instead. Shout out to anyone who gets that reference, but it's an evocative example that sticks with you specifically because it subverts specific expectations that we might even not know why we had for the character. Number 2, where we've been. What a character likes or dislikes is the culmination of their life experience up to that point. For example, a character might have a soft spot for a specific orange marmalade that their grandmother made every summer for them. It might be silly, but it's a detail that tells a story of family and connection. That might be the core memory that makes the paladin who they are today, and reminds them of what they really fight for. Are they fighting just to save the world, or are they fighting to protect those they care about? Those are 2 different things. Lofty ideals are a lot less relatable to people than grounded experiences. And believe me, you can get intense dramatic investment from your players by just describing the last meal a character has with their grandparents before they pass, in ways that you couldn't if the safety of the universe was on the line. And 3, what we experience as we encounter the new. As we travel and experience new places, one of the most evocative parts is trying new cuisine and dishes. So much of world building is in giving players the feeling of wonder when going somewhere new, and food is a great opportunity to make them feel that wonder. It can sell the otherness of an area, and make new cultures feel distinct and not just another weird place of the week that they go to. Think about your own experiences traveling and the excitement of trying new things as you dine with new people. These are the exact feelings we want to evoke in our games. Now, these are all questions about a player's individual experience, but how do we set the stage for that experience? That's where world building comes in. But while you may spend dozens, if not hundreds of hours coming up with every tiny detail about how your world works, it doesn't matter if that stays in your head. You need to be able to communicate that information to your players or your readers. And doing this via infodump is basically the worst way you can. We want to find ways that we can weave in the necessary details about our worlds and our characters, and do it in palatable doses for our players and readers. And food is a very palatable vector for doing this. It can answer a lot of questions. First, what does food tell us about a place? In one of Brandon Sanderson's lectures on world building, he spoke about how instead of detailing every little part of a new setting, it can be more evocative to go into great detail about one part and let the reader's brains fill in the rest. For example, imagine a beat-up apartment building with light filtering in through bullet holes that pierce through boarded-up windows. Just with that description, your brain is starting to fill in a lot of details that I didn't say and I didn't write. You're probably thinking about the dust along the baseboards. You're probably thinking about the creaky door handles squeaking as it doesn't properly click into place. You're probably thinking about the floorboards and how they might be misaligned or pulling up at the seams, about the flickering light ahead. None of those pieces were formally described to you, but your brain is already starting to paint the setting based on what you already know and connecting that with patterns. And food is very good for that, specifically in fantasy realms. Because even if we might not know the rules of how a setting works, oftentimes the vibes or the rules of food that we do know in the real world can sell it. So a meal works in the same way. Imagine fresh fruit, warm peach tarts drizzled with syrup that crumble as soon as you bite them and are washed down with a chilled glass of milk. Versus, on the other hand, a tin bowl filled with a stew that could only be described as the remnants of a nearby bog. It's dank and falls off your spoon like sludge, and you see a fried cattail reed sticking out of it. Dragonflies hover over the table hoping to get a bite. It is important, though, that different is not a value judgment. Food can be used as symbology, and the treatment of food can be used as a way to demonstrate a character's morality, but different does not inherently equal bad. And sometimes that's the exact lesson that we want to tell when we use food to represent various places. For example, instead, different can mean the same quality of loving and caring individuals in different places, just working with a different set of ingredients. Think about the food that would be prepared in a town surrounded by rolling wheat fields and temperate glades, compared to a dank magical swamp, festering with a variety of creatures. The ecology, geography, and even the historic events that may have changed the landscape of an area are all worth considering when designing a new location. And all those will have effects on what food can be sourced. Then you can use these ingredients to tell the story you want to tell, and describe your characters accordingly, sometimes even juxtaposing the same type of character between two different areas based on what food is available. Maybe you contrast the same type of loving, motherly, soup kitchen running matron. She's the heart of the village, and she makes sure that everyone leaves with a belly full and a smile on their face. But in one town, she's serving up fresh potato soup and fresh bread, and on the other town, she makes frog goulash. Both care just as much about the people around them, they're just using different ingredients to achieve that goal. The land itself, though, only tells part of the story. Political and military conflict can be just as easily described as by the meals shown. The most obvious answer in doing this is using famine as a method of juxtaposition as your story develops. Start your players in a bountiful breadbasket of a region, and as war or conflict develop, show how this scars the land as fields are raised and salted. In war, lives aren't only lost through swordplay and siege, but also through starvation. You can also go even further. Discuss the complicated effects of colonization on food. Whether that's the denial of a location's staple crop, as colonizers bring in ingredients from their homelands, or the interchange that occurs between cuisines. We can see that in the real world with dishes like the banh mi, a sandwich born from the French colonization of Vietnam, and how the baguette ended up being made with rice flour instead of wheat, and the fillings adopted traditional French pâté in addition to Vietnamese pickles and peppers. It ended up being a culmination of more than just one or the other of the two cultures. Now, obviously, treading that difficult line can be a bit tricky when it comes to storytelling, but that doesn't mean we should avoid engaging with it altogether. And there is a lot of depth to the history of food as an outcome of intercultural conflict and interchange. Next, what does food tell us about a person? The way that a person eats can paint an evocative picture about who they are. Compare these two scenes at a noble dinner party to your players. Both of these could be about an evil noble, but how they eat could show a different type of evil. First, Duke Worthington beckons your party over to talk with him at the banquet. In between filling his face with handfuls of roast stag, charred carrots, and lamb chops, he tells your party about a job that he needs completed discreetly. He calls over a servant who gives your party a knowing glance as the Duke grabs aimlessly for jelly rolls off the platter that the servant has retrieved. It seems the staff know the Duke's appetite well, and you wonder how far this gluttony extends. Second, Duchess Worthington beckons your party over to talk with her at the banquet. She tells your party about a job that she needs completed discreetly. She occasionally sips on a glass of wine that has rose hues in the light and is blood red when no light shines on it. Her plate seems sparse, but you see what she's eating is different than the rest of your noble party. It seems to be a platter of small woodland animals, skinned and roasted whole. The druid notices that each of these is endangered in this area, and as she catches his gaze, she tells your party that there's nothing sweeter than indulging in what others can no longer get their hands on. Both of these characters are incredibly sinister, but just a difference in the meal plan and eating behavior can exhibit this easily for your players without you needing to provide a massive info dump. You can already start to build out the rest of the dirty deeds they've committed in your head based just on how they ate at the dinner party. Now, what does food tell us about culture? We've talked about what might be commonly consumed in an area and what might be commonly consumed by an individual. But what about the intersection of those two things? About the individuals in an area? Well, then we can talk about food culture. Culture can be defined by a variety of different distinctions, whether those are based on lineage and race, on geographic area, on historical context, or some intersection of all three. In fantasy, a lot of shorthand for food culture already exists, such as dwarves being heavy drinkers, or elves having a connection to the forest. It's completely your choice whether or not you want to lean into these shorthand assumptions or actively subvert them. There is no right answer as long as your answer develops your characters and as long as it makes sense within the logic of the world that you're building. Here, we step into the realm of culinary ethnography, a study of that intersection between what a group eats and why. Let's start with the most archetypal contrast, dwarves and elves. For dwarves, they may be consuming large amounts of ale, salted meats, and whatever preserved foods stay well within their mountain holds. But the what isn't enough. We also want to delve into the why. Why do they drink so much? Maybe it's a physiological result from their high constitutions. Or maybe water in their area is not the most reliable and brewing allows for consistent and safe hydration. Or maybe it's a cultural focus, as a way to bring clans together after a hard day's work that they wouldn't be able to complete on their own. Maybe they have a high priority on securing fresh fruit through trade because it's hard for them to grow or source. And dwarves in your setting may become easily swayed by gifts of fresh fruit. Or maybe their lack of experience with fresh fruit makes it disgusting to them altogether. And if you want to see my take on dwarves, by the way, check out my video analyzing the culinary ethnography of dwarves, and you can see a bigger deep dive into this. On the other hand, let's look at elves. They're often displayed as relying on the bounty of the land they live on. Some are shown as completely vegetarian, refusing to eat any animals, while some are shown as skilled hunters. Why would they be one or another in your setting? Both could be valid, but whether they do or don't eat meat can tell a lot about their cultural beliefs. Maybe they do eat meat, but only when they're culling the forest of overpopulation. And maybe the desire to consume meat wantonly is seen as a negative trait in their society. We can also compare cultures next to each other by thinking about how certain aspects do or don't affect one another. Food preservation may be paramount to dwarves who live in mountain holds with little access to fresh ingredients, while elves may not care at all about food preservation. They might only consume fresh food. And why would preservation even matter to them if they always have the bounty of the woods? Think about the various festivals for both groups. How is food used to celebrate? And what are they celebrating? And importantly, think about who this applies to in your world. I mentioned a lot about dwarves in mountain holds, but do all of your dwarves live in mountain holds? If not, then everything I said may not apply, and you may need to think about what does apply for them. How about elves who are not tied to the forest? Think about exceptions to norms, and it often leads to more opportunity for interesting characterization than simply hand-waving and saying, every dwarf does it this way. The exercise of looking at food trends by cultures and regions is known as culinary ethnography, as mentioned. It is very important, though, that we walk this tightrope very carefully. Let's look at a real-world example. In China, historically, the north grows wheat because it is colder, has a drier climate, and flat land. It just grows better. On the other hand, the south has a warmer, wetter climate, and a lot more mountainous terrain, which is well suited for the production of rice. We can see this in the general cuisines that rose out of those places. Now, this leads to some important ways in which we phrase specific statements. Is it valid to say that traditionally, tables in Shanghai, in southern China, had rice with most of their meals? Yes, that is totally fine to say. Is it valid to say that because someone's from Beijing, which is in the north, that they dislike rice? No, we don't have the data to back that up for an individual. On the other hand, is it valid to say that an individual from Shanghai would definitely like more rice than noodles because they're from Shanghai? No, once again, without any more information about them, no, we cannot say that just based on trends. Trends are useful frameworks, but they're not laws. We don't want to end up in a no true Scotsman scenario where you say that a dwarf who doesn't drink is not a real dwarf just because of other trends. Just like this applies to real life respective cultures, we should make sure that we're building worlds that have the same amount of forethought and sensitivity to them. Now, all of this is good and fun, but how can we actually use these details in world building, both for our settings and for our characters? It can be very fun to do world design, don't get me wrong, and I've spent many hours in my own head about certain aspects of worlds that I've worked on. But if we're not communicating that information to our players, then that's nothing more than journaling, not game prep. So let's start with the importance of scope. It's important that, as we mentioned, trends are not laws. If anything, bucking against trends can lead to even more memorable story beats. We discussed the different levels that food can display information about a person, a group, or a place, so let's look at that from a variety of levels of view, starting at the culinary analysis of an entire country or region. Here we can ask questions like, what food grows well in this geographic area? What lineages and cultures inhabit this area? And what do their food cultures look like? Next, level 2, we can look at a specific city. Let's see whether they follow the trends of the entire region they're a part of, or maybe they have some exceptions. Do they engage with trade with a reliable trade partner that allows them to source ingredients that they can't grow themselves? And how has cultural exchange between different groups that live in this town affect food culture? Immigration happens for a variety of reasons, and more often than not, it leads to some pretty tasty food. And finally, let's look at individual characters or groups of characters. How does a character's upbringing in not only a geographic location, but as a member of their own culture impact their tastes? And how do their own lived experiences change what they like or dislike? Maybe they choked on a fishbone as a child, and now the smell of fish soup is enough to make them gag. Nothing culturally or geographically would cause that, but their own lived experience would. So let's put everything we've learned so far to work. Here's an assignment. It's your turn. I want you to consider food culture at the 3 different levels of scope we mentioned, but in your own world that you've built. First, look at the wide view of an entire culture and their food. It is easy to get lost in every little particular, so try to keep a high-level view of this and answer just enough questions to be able to describe it in a few sentences or paragraphs, or to pinpoint some of the things that might be interesting to your players. We don't need to feed them with a fire hose, but we do want to have some small pieces of nuance that we can sprinkle in when we want to add a little more characterization or depth. Second, I want you to describe some of the food trends in a specific town or city you've designed and why they occur in the first place. And third, discuss the eating habits of a single character and how does this provide more depth and characterization to them. Feel free to pause the video and please include these answers in the comments because I would love to see the work you're doing building your own worlds. This is always super exciting and very interesting to me. Now, I'll go through some of my own answers to this assignment as an example. In my setting, high elven food culture is derived from the culmination of necessity and environment, and their environment is one of true bounty, allowing for a more particular palate. After all, it's much easier to only eat things that taste good when starvation is not on the line. Not many lineages can claim the same abundance, which leads to a rather unique culinary culture. The next matter of note is that my elves do not take part in animal husbandry. This is completely by choice and not by ineptitude, and also follows from the fact that their experience with true bounty relieves a lot of the pressure on finding ways to force animals to their will. In fact, the term elven shepherd is such a rare sight that in some areas in my world it's used as a term to describe a contradiction. Furthermore, the discussion of consuming meat is a nuanced one that varies clan by clan and region by region, with different groups having different limits. Some swear off meat altogether, while others hunt but only eat specific animals, and different animals can be taboo to different clans. It can be dangerous to go in blind to an elven potluck if you don't know what is taboo to consume. There's a lot more we could delve into, but let's move on to the next level of scope. Level 2. One town I've designed is the port sanctuary of Alta Eth. Once a tranquil elven harbor built into the emerald slopes of the coast, Alta Eth has become one of the busiest ports of the new age of sails. Its natural coves, ringed by white stone cliffs and forested ridges, once served as safe mooring for elven pilgrims. But today, the docks are crowded with vessels from across the known world, and the city's markets are filled with foreign grains, salted meats, and exotic spices that mingle uneasily with the traditional fare of sea greens, skyberry wine, and river fish. At the heart of the city is the sanctuary, a sprawling hall of living wood and carved marble. Among the elder elves, there's a desperate call to safeguard tradition, preserving the old ways of eating only what the land renews and preparing meals in harmony with the seasons, and most importantly, forbidding waste. Among the younger elves, though, there's a restless conviction that Alta Eth must change with the times, embracing new crops, foreign brewing methods, and even engaging in the lucrative trade of monster parts and rare ingredients. Food is very important here, because the table itself has become a battlefield of culture. In one tavern, you might find elves sharing a humble stew of river fish and wild herbs, and pointedly refusing imported wheat or pork. Just across the street, younger sailors and merchants would raise cups of halfling stout, while feasting on hybrid recipes like griffin roasted with gnomish peppercorns, or owlbear jerky spiced with dwarven salts. Each plate served in Alta Eth is not only a meal, but a choice in the struggle between tradition and transformation. And level 3, let's look at an individual character. For my character, I went to an old favorite I played many years back, Eldris the Exiled. Eldris was born to the green-shadowed halls of Alta Eth, and he is son of one of the most respected druids. His childhood was marked by long days in the hills and forests, learning to ward off poachers, track the paths of owlbears, and listen for the hoof fall of the golden stag. To him, food was not just sustenance. It was sacred ritual, and his father instilled in him the conviction that to consume a magical beast was no different than consuming the soul of the forest itself. When his father fell ill, Eldris tried every recipe, every tincture, and every sacred remedy, but he continued to watch his father's strength falter. Desperate, Eldris turned to outsiders. A traveling cleric and herbalist in the port who offered salvation in exchange for an unthinkable price. The heart of a golden stag, a holy beast to the elves of Altaeth. Against everything he was taught, Eldris hunted the stag. His father was healed, but the act was judged a betrayal. The druids called it sacrilege, his father deemed it unforgivable, and despite his pleas, Eldris was banished. Exile has hardened both him and his palate. He no longer prays over every meal, nor does he avoid taboo ingredients. Where once he wouldn't touch owlbear meat, now he roasts it over a fire without hesitation. He seeks out foods that would scandalize the sanctuary. Griffin marrow stews, dragon jerky, fermented kraken imported from halfling traders. He believes he no longer deserves the blessed food of his home, and he revels in the new. But he is a man divided. He sneers at traditional elven cuisine in public, and dismisses it as bland ritual, but he can't help but cook in the old ways when he's left alone, boiling herbs just so, and seasoning with the same motions his father taught him. To him, food tells the story of a man at war with himself in ways that he would not be able to vocalize. Now, writing and telling are two different things. So let's discuss the ways that we can actively push our players to engage with food at our own tables, aside from just telling them, hey, there's this nice new menu at the tavern. First, food as survival. This is the simplest method. The easiest way to get your characters to care about food is to really make them hungry and to make that count. To do this, we do need to discuss how food is commonly hand-waved away in many modern TTRPGs. A lot of games have tried to move away from high levels of necessary accounting or spreadsheeting in order to focus more on narrative play, which I do totally understand. My only issue is that this makes it really easy to never once have to think about what your character is eating. That discussion is often boiled down to, your party's been traveling for 4 days, mark off 4 rations from your inventory, okay? And that's all the thought that's given to it. Is your character really only consuming the same hardtack and salted meat every single day for months or years on end? Think about how crazy you would go if you lived like that. Obviously, this line of thought requires either a change in how you manage inventories at your table or other mechanical changes to food altogether. Personally, I include a morale system in my games, and repetitive or low-quality food is one way to tick at morale, while investing in enjoying the good stuff can restore morale. Think about how many times a long work week was only redeemed because of a meal you had planned at the end of it. Then you'll understand the impact of a good food on morale. I'll delve more into these mechanical details in another lecture, but even without changing the way that players need to mark food in their inventory, you can describe the effects that it has as they sit around the campfire, and encourage them to explore and spend some downtime engaging with the wilderness around them. Next, food as social glue. Food is great because what is more universal than a meal? Regardless of culture, lineage, or location, people gotta eat. So instead of having your players engage with a character by just standing around awkwardly as they talk, have them discuss the topic over a meal. They'll soon see how managing a dinner can lead to a lot of social intrigue. And just like in our example with the 2 nobles, how someone eats can do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to you having to characterize that person in a way that is much easier to explain to them. And if you want a really great example, just think of Denethor eating a tomato. That scene is still discussed in depth decades later, and I don't know a way that Peter Jackson could have relayed that characterization in a better way than showing him eating. Finally, food as a symbol. Food is a great vehicle for symbology. Food works well because everyone at your table knows what it feels like to be hungry, to savor, and to share. If you choose 1 or 2 specific ingredients and let them recur across a campaign, they become the shorthand for your themes. Survival, memory, power, faith, all of these can be explained without lore dumps. Treat them as long view symbols that grow with the story. Here are some ingredient motifs that you could lift directly. Salt often represents survival and covenant. It keeps travelers alive with preserved food. It can be a tax that exploits them, and it can be shown as purifying in divine rituals. Bread signals community and dignity. Free loaves at the temple, bread lines in a siege, and at last the breaking of bread to end a feud. Rice or grain can display labor and obligation. A humble porridge at harvest, a cruel tithe on the poor in wartime as the fields are burned, and restoration displayed by the first harvest season after wartime. Tea and herbs show ritual. Cheese and milk show provincial diligence and craftsmanship. Chili and spices can be used to represent trade and ambition. The list goes on. I will go more in depth into these opportunities in a future lecture, but start playing around with what feelings are evoked by various foods or ingredients, and how those can be used as shorthand for your players. So, why does food matter? At the end of the day, food matters in our games because it matters in our lives. It's a shared language, one that every player instinctively understands. By paying attention to what is eaten, how it's prepared, and who sits at the table, we add depth to our worlds without needing to rely on heavy exposition. A single meal can reveal a culture's geography, a city's conflicts, or a character's innermost values. It can symbolize survival, excess, tradition, or change. And because food is so universal, those details resonate instantly with our players and ground them in the fantastic into something familiar. So as you go forward and build your own worlds, I encourage you to think beyond rations and tavern stews. Use food as a tool. Let it color your landscapes, shape your characters, and give weight to your stories. And in doing so, you're not just feeding your players' imagination, you're inviting them to taste the world you've created. And I promise, that meal will be remembered long after the dice have finished rolling. Next time, we'll dig into the geography and how ecology shapes the setting and food. What grows, what doesn't, and how that defines the flavor of entire cultures. Until then, if you'd like to support this work, you can find me on my Ko-fi page, Eating the Dungeon. All my content is available for free download. You will need to wait on this one though, because it is being compiled into a much bigger project, which I'm excited to talk about in the near future. You can also join the conversation with other hungry world builders in the Discord. Links are down below, and I'll see you at the next meal.